So welcome everybody to MYND Initiative's inaugural webinar. So thank you to MYND for putting this on. This webinar is Corona Consciousness. What can we take away from these very unusual times? My name's Lisa Rowlands and I'm facilitating the session for you this evening. We'll be together around 40 minutes, I guess, or so, depending how much we want to chat. And I have got a lovely colleague, Nikki Kashmir, over there monitoring the chat box. So if you have any particular questions throughout the session that come to your mind, just pop them in the chat box and Nikki's going to keep a bit of an eye on them and alert me to them if they need to be addressed straight away. Otherwise, we'll make sure we come back to everything at the end. I'm also going to ask you to participate a little bit using the chat box. So I was just going to say, if anybody's not able to use a chat box, put a note in the chat box, but that's not going to work, is it? So how about if I just very quickly unmute everybody and give you the chance to tell me that.
I'm fine.
Yep, all good.
I'm fine too.
Yeah,
So
all good.
A lot of Zoom these days.
Everyone's had enough Zoom. Everyone's Zoom.
Yeah, Zooming almost every day.
Experts, yeah.
Yeah.
We call it Zoom fatigue.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets a bit much. Anyway, we shall press on then. That's great. Hang on. Just mute you all again. So I'm just going to mute you all, but you can unmute yourself if you have a burning need to interrupt me and say something. So before we go any further, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands upon which we are meeting tonight, because there will be varied lands. So I'd like to pay respect to all elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge anybody in our space that is living with mental illness at this period or has lived experience with mental illness, and also just to acknowledge those that love and care and support people who are living with mental illness and through their recovery. I'd also like to acknowledge MYND Initiative for taking the initiative to put on this free webinar for you all. I think this is the first one. I'm pretty sure that's correct. So good for you. Okay, just a little bit on MYND because it is relevant for us to connect with what they're doing. MYND Initiative is a mental health not-for-profit organisation. Its main aim is to educate the community that mental health matters to everyone by stimulating and continuing conversations in the community. With a better understanding of mental health, we are more likely to seek help as well as have the compassion to support others who are going through challenges with their mental health, and in so doing create communities of understanding. And I really love the idea of the communities of understanding. I've also highlighted the word conversations there because to me that's the most important part of creating compassionate communities for people living with mental illness and mental health issues. So we're going to have a bit of a conversation tonight, but also I'd like you to further the conversation and think about taking the conversations that may come to your mind tonight further out into the community so we can help continue to build that compassion. So tonight, the structure of the session tonight is kind of broken into 4 parts. It is related to coronavirus, and when I started pulling this together, we were kind of in our country in a bit of a different space around it. We were really, it was all pretty positive and looking pretty good. And I thought to myself at that time, I was seeing a lot of anxiety in people actually coming out of shutdown and out of lockdown and having to face some things out in the world that perhaps they'd put them aside. But I'd also got a sense from a number of people that they actually quite enjoy some parts of the different world that we were living in. So I thought it was an important thing to reflect on what had gone on for people during that time and what we can all take from it. So this is a bit of positive slant in about acknowledging the positive coping strategies that we've been using this year in particular, and what lessons we've learned, how we want to change our life, because at the time we might be thinking, oh, I like this, I feel better in my life about this, and then we just get back into the same old, same old. So we're going to work through a bit of a process tonight about taking note of what your reactions have been. We're going to acknowledge the impact of these reactions, acknowledge the impact of the changes that we've been having to make in our lives, particularly the impact on our mental health. We're going to reflect on how well we have coped and what positive coping strategies we've used. And also then being proactive about, we hear a lot about the new normal, so I want you to create your own new normal and what that's going to be. So I would really like everyone to have a pen and paper at hand, because you're going to be active in this. And one of the things that often happens when you're, I find when we participate in training, is that we might be quite excited about some things that we want to take away and implement in our life or in our workplace, but something happens in the transition. Something happens when we walk out the door, and before we get to the next door, we tend to forget, and it doesn't always transfer over, I guess. So having something written down is obviously going to make a bit of a difference for you. So I'm hoping everyone's got a pen and paper handy, and I want you to divide it into these 4 different sections: my reactions, the impact, reflection, and proactive planning. Okay, everyone's got that? Okay, so excuse my voice is a little bit strained today. There's a whole lot of dust in the air up here. I'm in Queensland, so a whole lot of dust in the air, which is really very unusual this time of year. But it's been a bit of a time. So what I would like to do, speaking of that, speaking of me being in Queensland, just get a quick gauge on where everybody is tonight. So could you pop in the chat box for us, just either the city or the town that you're joining us from? Melbourne, Twitters, Sydney, okay, so lots of big cities. So particularly, we're all very aware of what Melbourne are going through at this time. And I personally would like to acknowledge and thank the whole of Melbourne for doing some hard yards to help protect the rest of us, keeping yourselves safe, but also keeping the rest of the country safe. So we do appreciate what you're doing. I hope you're coping. So first step for what we're going to work through today is look at reactions. So I want you to think about the last, has it been 6 months, I think? You know, you've probably had a range of reactions to the whole coronavirus scenario. But if you had to sum it up in one word or a couple of words, what would it be? And again, I want you to put that in the chat box for us, but I want you to write it down on your piece of paper as well. How would you describe, in as few words as possible, what your reaction has been? Frustrating, isolating, uncertain. Pretty commonly used words, I think. Withdrawn. Yeah, anybody else got some more reactions that you've noticed? Angry, yeah. Concerned, absolutely. Concerned for others. Unsure. The uncertainty seems to have been nerve-wracked. Yeah. I think sometimes for me, another word would have been overwhelmed at different times. And sometimes that related to the range of, not the range, but the amount of information that we were trying to absorb, to understand, to keep workplaces, etc., safe. Okay, great. So just take note of that and think about it. It's important to name our reactions. I think one thing that I often work with people is that we have different reactions to different things, or sometimes different things trigger us, and it's important to acknowledge it and name it so that we can deal with it. Once something's named, we can even park it away for a little while and come back to it if needed. But if we name it, we've got to deal with it. So I'm going to work through very briefly 17 things. I'm not going to really touch on them. I'm just going to let them know they're there, and I've given you the link for the particular article that I found really useful in acknowledging these reactions and how they are all normal. All our reactions are perfectly normal to a very abnormal situation. This article is 17 totally normal things to feel right now, according to therapists, and it's pretty recent. You can see from April, and what they did was talk with a whole lot of therapists who reported what people were coming in and talking to them about at the time. So a pretty good gauge, I think. So the first is that you're burnt out. So just adjusting to this new normal. And as I said, for me, you know, particularly the range of information. If you're working or you've got kids at school and you belong to a sports club, everyone's sending you their information and updates about it. But alongside that is also that we haven't had our usual recharge options. So catching up with family and friends, or going to the gym, or whatever it is that normally helps you recharge when you're feeling overwhelmed. Anger has been a reaction for some people, and I think someone had that on their list as well. And different things may make each of us angry at different times. Another reaction is that you're surprisingly calm. So it might feel weird that you're actually feeling like you're doing well. When there's lots of talk every day on the news, again tonight I've just heard of a big increase in mental health funding in our state, which is fantastic. But if you're not feeling like you're fitting into that bucket, then you might be thinking that there's something wrong with your reaction. None of these reactions are wrong. They're all quite normal, but it can make you feel like you are, what's the word, that you're missing something if you're not feeling certain things that people are talking a lot about. But according to the therapist, it is a common reaction. It could be about avoidance. As I mentioned before, the level of anxiety for some people coming out of lockdown, that there may have been some things that they've been able to avoid. Also, coronavirus feels out of sight, out of mind. And it really does for me as well. It's kind of something that's there, but it's not there, you know. Life is pretty usual, sorry Melbourne, but life is at this stage pretty usual for us, not all completely, obviously, and lots of awareness, hopefully, of what's going on. But it's certainly not in my face like it is for other people. Perhaps you're just more equipped to deal with this than you thought. So that's a positive. You're spiraling about what might happen. So uncertainty of a pandemic, such a new situation, new scenario for so many of us. There's a lot that we can't predict, and I've certainly picked up uncertainty in quite a number of your responses. You may be struggling to work from home, and the work-life balance is well in the toilet or out the back door or wherever, and finding it hard to get away from work. You're mourning cancelled events. So things like birthdays and weddings, etc., that you were really looking forward to, that have been demolished by coronavirus. They just could not go ahead. And it's pretty normal and a usual reaction to react to missing out on something that you've been looking forward to, especially very big things like weddings. But You might also feel guilty that those things are actually quite small in comparison to some of the consequences of COVID-19 for other people. But again, it is a normal reaction to be sad, angry and annoyed, or just disappointed at missing out. You're yo-yoing between hopefulness and hopelessness. Again, it's natural to feel a bunch of things at once or in cycles, and especially there's a lot going on, so up and down. This is why it was hard probably for a lot of you to pick the one word. You may have picked the word that you're feeling at the moment most. I like number 8, you're craving a freaking hug. For some people, this is actually a learning that we've had of the importance of community connection and human interaction, or physical interaction in particular. And some people are very isolated to that, and other people will have people close by to meet that need. You're stuck and unsure. So you might have had to stop on something. You might have been looking for a new job and now you're not feeling so sure about jumping out of where you are. You may have started a new relationship. I can't imagine people starting new relationships in lockdown, but it would be interesting. It might be worth a blog or something to follow around that. You're guilty about your relative safety, security, or privilege. It's sort of like a survivor's guilt. I think that I've certainly not been overly uncomfortable where I am, but really recognising for other people with small children at home, etc., the extent and not being able to visit elderly relatives, etc. Now, this one's pretty important. I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about this. Existential regret. So one thing that having isolated time, or a bit more time on our hands, can make us think. And that's not a bad thing. This is a good thing. And some of the things people may have apparently have been, reporting, thinking about is some sort of regret about past choices and experiences and values. People are saying they're feeling that maybe they've been wasting their time or worrying about things that really aren't that important. So getting perspective on life again and what's important to you. So this is a good thing. This is a really positive thing. And I think that perhaps certainly in the early part of everything that was happening, people were really recognising the importance of those relationships, etc., social connections, family, their own health, all those things, the things that we probably feel should be most important, but we get caught up in other things in our everyday life. So it's a little bit about what we're going to be doing today as well as this evening, is thinking about those, some of the things that may have come into our mind that we've rethought in our lives. You're grieving. So some people have actually lost loved ones through COVID-19. But even if you haven't lost somebody personally, we're all going to have had some kind of loss. So maybe it was a job, maybe it's freedom, maybe it's your feeling of safety, your freedom to travel, for example. You're feeling inadequate about your productivity. Have you noticed, certainly for the first few months, the number of things that were in your face about people taking up courses and learning new skills and learning a language, take the time to learn a language and all these other things that were kind of being thrown at us. If you weren't doing that, you may have felt that you weren't using the time. Again, you might have kids at home that you're homeschooling, and that can obviously bring challenges, especially if you're working. Excuse me. Another important one, particularly in the mental health field. You're dealing with a resurgence of unrelated past trauma. So if you find yourself suddenly consumed with thoughts and feelings about something from your past, you might feel caught off guard. But it's actually our brain's functioning as designed, because it's like a fight or flight response to a sensed danger. And or it could be freeze, fight, flight or freeze. And I think they've added a fourth one now as well. The last little comment there by this particular therapist, Ryan Sheed, is where he says, because our brains and especially our fight or flight response are set to remind us of danger in order to keep us safe, the pandemic is bringing everyone's past traumas to the forefront. I don't think it's bringing everyone's past traumas to the forefront, but certainly for a number of people, that may have been the reaction. So something to be aware of if you're noticing this in people around you or in yourselves. And number 16, you're numb. You just might feel nothing at all. At some stages, maybe not the whole time through, but you just feel nothing. And loneliness, actually, you might feel something completely different. Because obviously we can't possibly cover everything in the range of everybody's reactions. We haven't included things like depression, boredom, intimacy, inadequacy, excitement, a whole range of emotions. Okay, but whatever it is that you're feeling, it's a valid response. And it's important to remember that for you and for others as well, because you may question other people's reactions. So the first thing I want you to do with that piece of paper in front of you, you may have already put down the word that you had in the chat box for me, but I want you to think again whether that's raised anything for you as far as what your reaction may have been. And I just want you to write that down on the piece of paper. You're not going to have to share this. This is just for your own information. And take note of whether it has changed. Okay. Before we go on, I'm really mindful of sitting in front of a computer, and some people do this all day. So I just want you to stand up if you can where you are and have just a very quick stretch, and then we'll get back on with it. It's not good to sit like this all the time. Okay, good. How do I feel today? Maybe all of the above there. Okay, so on to the second step then for what we're going to work through is to acknowledge your impact. So reactions are one thing. We have reactions, you know, obviously how we react, and we've named those, but the impact of the changes on our lives is something, a slightly different facet to have a look at that I want you to explore. So we've all had to put changes in place, some more than others, but there's no judgment on how small a change can actually have a very big impact for some people. We all react differently to change. Maybe our changes have related to social or physical distancing. So let's look in particular about isolation. So I think around mental health, mental illness, and this is probably the most significant area. So we've known that isolation can lead to mental illness and vice versa for a long time. But for some people in community, isolation is actually a very new thing. Some people live with it a lot of their life, a lot of their day, you know, but for other people, that's a very new experience. So when I say isolation, I want you to think about what comes into your mind. Is it a positive or a negative thing? Because in fact, isolation can actually really suit some people. Maybe for short periods and not for long periods. But have a think about what that word, that term makes you feel. So lack of connection can affect our mental well-being. And another thing that we've noticed around, yes, we have got these kinds of means of connecting with people. We're using these to connect with family and friends and work, but all this extra screen time that we're having is also affecting our eyes, but also sleep patterns, which we know is very strongly linked to mental health and physical health. And this information comes from Lifeline, and I think Lifeline have had at least a 50% increase in calls to their crisis centres over this period. Beyond Blue are experiencing the same, and also in domestic and family violence hotlines have had just under, I think, a 50% increase. So isolation is being separated from other people and your environment. Sometimes it occurs through decisions that we make ourselves, but sometimes it's just because of other circumstances. Loneliness is the feeling that can come with it. So loneliness is that feeling of sadness or distress about being by yourself or feeling disconnected from the world. And remember, it's also possible to feel lonely even when you are still surrounded by people. So how can loneliness and isolation affect our physical, mental, and social health? That we could have physical symptoms, such as those. Mental health conditions, absolutely, has been an increased risk of depression and anxiety during this time. Low energy, some people are finding it just really hard to get through the day. Sleeping problems, dietary problems, substance use. There's been a lot of talk in the media recently, particularly around increased consumption of alcohol. I can imagine smoking as well. It's not something we talk about so much in the media front, but if for some people, workplaces are smoke-free, so it can actually control the amount of smoking that you're able to do. So if you're at home and don't have those limitations, I imagine smoking has increased. And negative feelings are also more paramount when we're lonely or isolated. I'm going to tell you a story. While I tell you a story, I want you to just think about what your signs and symptoms relating to isolation and loneliness, and maybe the new normal. And you know, we keep talking about this new normal like it's going to be some kind of exciting place to go, I think. But I want you to write down. So under that second box around the impact heading, what the impact has been for you. I want you to write down what sort of things you've noticed for you. While you do that, I'm going to tell you, it's actually not a cactus story. I just put that there to remind me. It does have a plant involved. It's a video I saw some years ago now of a young woman who was living in an apartment, and she had either depression or bipolar disorder. I can't remember. Pretty sure she was living in Melbourne, and did a little educational video about how she copes with her mental illness. And her story related to having a puppy and having succulents. So it's not cactus, it's succulent plants. So in her apartment, she had all these succulents around, and she got herself a puppy. And the reason she got a puppy was, she said, because I have to, she's on a 4th floor apartment. So she said, I have to go out of my apartment 4 times a day, at least, to take this puppy to the toilet. So she's a way of making me get out. And the succulents, I always remember this, that she said, they're really hardy plants. She loved them, but she said, they're really hardy plants. And if I look at those plants and they're not doing well, then I know that I'm not doing well. Because if I'm not looking after them, I'm not looking after me. So there's little signs, that things that we can put in place that triggers to let us know that we need to step back and change something that we're doing in our life. Okay, the third part is reflection. Reflection is a really, really important skill to have and use all throughout life. And we train community workers to use their reflective skills all the time. It's like an internal supervisor. But we're not often very good at recognizing our strengths. We don't like talking ourselves up very much. So what I'm going to do now is make you talk yourselves up. And just quickly in the chat box again, I want you to identify one strength that you think that you have. Maybe something you bring to your work, or maybe something you bring to your relationships or your community. Something you're good at, or a strength that you have. So in the chat box, please. Kindness, thank you, Nikki. I'd agree. Compassion, lovely. Thank you, Amy. Listening, so important, so important. Well done, Daniel. Versatility, nice. Sometimes if we don't know what our strengths are, it's good to ask the people around us what they think they are, because often it can surprise you what they'll tell you. Okay, Thank you. So reflection, we often think it's about looking back, but it's not also, it's about looking ahead. Come on now. Come on, Nadia. I agree. Everybody write something. If you know Nadia, write us what one of his strengths in the chat box. So reflection is about using what you look to move forward. Oh, generosity. There you go, Nadia. So think about a recent learning experience, something that you've learned something from, and I'm wondering, just for your own purposes, did you come to recognize it as a learning experience at the time or afterwards when you reflected on it, or just now because I'm asking you to learn to reflect on it? So think about it and what made you learn from it. You know, how did you get your reflection juices running? Some people use journals or writing to help with self-reflection and may do that every day, or they may just do it from time to time when they feel that they could benefit from it. When you're doing reflection, I want you to think about everything that's going on. I want your processes, the body sensations, you know, breathing, feelings, thoughts, actions, the reactions of others and your reactions to them. These are important for reflection. So what positive coping strategies have you drawn on? So have a think about that, and I'm going to write them down in the reflection box. So what positive coping strategies have you drawn on to get through this particular last 6 months? I also would really like some people to share them, and at least one of them in the chat box as well. Because, you know, you can teach others. Breathing. Oh, good to remember. Do you just mean breathing normally, Nikki, or particular type of breathing? Yoga, meditation, exercise, absolutely. Sort of physical and mental connection in these responses. Deep, slow breathing, yeah. Because what we tend to do when we're stressed is this really shallow breathing, right? Doing my garden, lovely. Reading or actively reaching out to people who I don't see much yet. Yeah, so personally for me, when it was particularly isolating, writing a plan for the next day was something that worked for me. And I'd actually would include a lot of those things in my plan, that, you know, exercise, contact somebody, get outside twice a day, those sorts of things, and just help me to have a focus for each day. So keep your positive coping strategies list handy. There's another article I'm just going to recommend for you to have a look at. It's in the MYND Initiative website by Dr. Di McGreal there, around with 25 tips for COVID-19 around mental health wellness. So some really excellent suggestions in there. Another great list I found was Greater Good magazine, and some of these will be relevant, you're very aware of anyway. Being with others is a key to happiness, is one of the things that a lot of us have learned. Reducing stress is good for everyone. Showing gratitude matters. We need less stuff than we think. Who spent less money in the last 6 months than normal? Yeah. And we're strong when we act together. And this is an interesting time, I think, in Australia, because I think when, you know, February, March, April, May, there was a lot of this, we're all in this together, you know, stronger together, I think, was that the catch cry? And I think that we were. I think there's a bit of a sense now that we're not so much in it together. That I think some of the states are feeling not quite so supported. So it's important that we continue to remember the importance of it and how much we were benefiting from it at the time. Right, so the last part of the process that we're working through is now to be proactive. So from what you've thought about what's been going on for you in the last 6 months, and where you want to, you know, what you learned from it and what was good about the situation. I want you to now write your being proactive list. So it might be really enhancing and drawing on those strengths and skills that you identified that you did, those positive coping strategies, or it might be that you learned, oh, I actually like working from home. So I need to get this into my life. Or I can work out at home. I don't need my gym membership. And what are those things that you're going to keep going with? Having Zoom dates with your friends, running your book club via Zoom, whatever those things that you benefited from, pop them on your proactive list, or just staying slow, traveling locally rather than planning overseas trips, supporting local business. There's been a real, and this actually started earlier in the year with the bushfire crisis, a real push about supporting and purchasing from local businesses. And there's been a big increase apparently in people doing this. So let's keep that going, because that's a really good thing to do. Another little list from MYND Spot: get informed and shut down the noise. And I think we can all fall back into the trap of being obsessively hit with media about what's going on. So learn what your limitations are in that. And for some people, that can be fairly endless, but for other people, it can be, right, I'm going to get a 15-minute update in the morning and a 15-minute update at the end of the day. Probably nothing that important is going to happen in between, but if it does, someone will alert me to it. Whatever works for you. Note where your support comes from. So I would actually also like you to write that down in your being proactive page. Where did the support come for you through this time? Because it's not all about us, but acknowledging our family, our friends, our dogs, our cats, our work colleagues that reached out, our neighbours that, you know, did check in on you, your local coffee shop person, if that's the one place that you can walk up to each day and get a takeaway coffee and they remember your name and it's like music to your ears. Remember those. That's all part of your support. Right, so hopefully you've got a good list there of lessons learned that could be keepers. So this is your new normal. We need to transfer it. We need to not forget that. We need to bring it with us. That's kind of the end of that process. I'm just going to, I just want to reflect one more time on MYND, and then we're going to open up for any questions that anyone might have. I will turn, possibly we might stop recording at that time, but I will put your microphones open for questions, or alternatively start writing comments or questions in the chat box. So just another reminder about the importance of MYND. Their mission is to spread the message that mental health matters to everyone, to challenge the stigma and myths associated with having mental health illness, and develop communities of understanding. I really love that term. Through education, conversation, and music, we hope to empower the individual to share their mental health story. Developing communities of understanding will grow the ability to support and guide individuals, families, and other communities through an often difficult journey, as well as encouraging and promoting awareness and understanding of mental health. Every person dealing with mental health issues has a story to tell, and the individual factors that make up their story can become an inspiration for others to take steps towards their own healing. So we're all part of that community now, and it's important that we go out and take our own learnings out there and have more conversations, or use through the use of education and music as well, or whatever you have found that works for you in helping people feel connected to their community and feeling a part of a community that does understand what they're living with. I do just want to include some numbers in case anybody feels the need to contact anybody for support for anything that might have come up for you within this session or afterwards as well. Range of very important resources that we're very lucky to have here in Australia. Right, so question time. I'm going to I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to come back here with you all. And I'm just wondering if anybody does have a question.